All right, Jacqueline, thanks so much for doing this. My first question that I have for you is, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you started in the mental health space, and we'll go from there.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am a trauma psychologist, so I ended up starting in the mental health space actually through trauma. I through caring for folks who had been through trauma. I started off working in domestic violence shelters where I was supporting fellow women and folks who were trying to get into safer situations, and also for a sexual assault advocacy center on campus. And I knew I wanted to work with folks who were healing from trauma in some way, and eventually realized that I wanted to do that through counseling and therapy. And so, yeah, that's what led me into studying psychology and spending 11 years in school to earn a doctorate in psychology. I guess
Mm.
go big or go home.
Yeah. You mentioned it but just a minute ago about trauma psychology. What is it, and kind of just give a background on it.
Yeah. So we train in as psychologists generally. We have different areas in psychology. My area happens to be counseling psychology. The I think the thing that's unique about that is that we do a lot of depth of learning like you do for any other type of psychologist, but it's a lot more rooted in culture, systems, an understanding of all of the like social and systemic things that can impact people as well as their individual experiences. So when you come from the counseling psychology perspective and learn and train in as a trauma psychologist, it means that my expertise is all about folks who are going through changes in life, folks who are healing from trauma, and specifically the ways that that has happened individually, socially, and socioculturally, right? Like communal and collective trauma, generational trauma. So it's just a much more layered understanding of the way trauma impacts our brains, but also the way that it impacts the way that we think about ourselves and our stories.
Hmm. So, do you treat people, who have with a complex trauma, or do you kind of just branch out to other populations?
Yeah. So my first love is working with folks who are healing from complex trauma and PTSD. I especially love working with um, fellow survivors of childhood abuse and fellow survivors of social or interpersonal trauma. I've just always really enjoyed that work. But yeah, I spent a good 6 years working in the VA as well. So I've done a lot of work with vets who have interpersonal childhood and combat trauma. I worked in student counseling centers working with not just trauma and old wounds that were coming up for them at that point in life, but also major changes. And a lot lately that I've been doing is working with people who are transitioning into parenthood or into new jobs, and they're noticing some of those old wounds coming up. So old defensive learning like people pleasing, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, the things that we all can kind of understand. And my perspective is that I also tend to see how that can be rooted sometimes in stress, trauma, and oppressive systems that we've lived through as well.
Hmm. What are the therapy sessions like, and also what sorts of modalities and approaches do you use when working with people with complex trauma?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question because I do think it's kind of an unnecessary mystery about what these actually look like. And it can make it feel more intimidating for folks who are trying to decide whether or not this might be helpful to them. So I love this question. It really it looks very different depending on the type of work I'm doing with the person in front of me. I have quite a few modalities that I've trained in on purpose so that I could really meet the person in front of me with what seems to be working for them. I do have favorites. I really love narrative and feminist type therapies. These are kind of postmodern therapies that are very much centered on the client and their experience and their story, but also look at systems and breaking down messaging we've taken in, whether from our families or society. And I really love eclectic approaches. So taking, I'm trained in on approaches like prolonged exposure and cognitive processing therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and I love them all. But I also like to bring in strengths from other approaches. So I'll bring in some somatic work when we're trying to help them soothe their nervous system while discussing something painful. Or I'll bring in some of the feminist narrative leanings, no matter what perspective or like what modality I'm using, because I believe in that empowerment of the client. So sessions are usually set by the client's pace. And we, a lot of times, will start with agreeing together about what we're trying to do that day. We'll check in about how they're feeling going in. We like to keep communication open throughout. So, especially if we're talking about something kind of heavy and painful, we sit in with the emotions. We might bring in some parts work to help understand what the emotions are, what parts of them are feeling what. We might do some somatic work or some breathing together to help show their body and them that they are safe in that moment. And we might also do some work breaking down just different things that they've taken in over time that no longer serve them, or maybe crediting parts of them that rose up at different times to protect them, but that no longer need to protect them in their current situations. And yeah, it's a really beautiful process, but every session is incredibly different. And I think I love that because it's so there's something really exciting about walking in that way with other folks. Like I never quite know. I know it's kind of like when you know how to hike, but you don't know this particular trail, right? So you're like, I'm going to go on this hike with this person and I'm going to be just as surprised as they are. I'm bringing some skills from past hikes, but I don't know what's in front of us. And it's a really cool experience for me to get to walk it with them. And I think it's also really cool as somebody who gives and has been in therapy to be able to have somebody who's just with you and has your back no matter what. They're just unconditionally um, uh, there with you and supporting you, which I think is not everybody's experience by that point.
Because what I was gonna ask is, what have you learned in doing this kind of work? What are some of the things that you sort of take in and say, like I learned a lot from talking to this person, talking to that person about their trauma.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I love that question too. I love your questions. There's definitely a lot that I get to learn as just part of what I do. I think this one of the things that I've really solidified as a belief over the course of working with folks through trauma and stress and everything else that they've gone through is that people are astoundingly lovely. Like I know that maybe sounds a bit cheesy, but there's something really cool about getting to see folks in this like truly vulnerable, authentic version of themselves and meeting them there, showing them that care and focus and seeing just the ways that people grow and heal and do just amazing things. Like I see people breaking cycles, parenting in ways that they deserve to have been parented, but certainly weren't. I see them, a lot of the folks I work with are very creative. A lot of them are neurodivergent. A lot of them are really justice focused. So they've been through pain and they're turning around and not only healing themselves, but trying to make some sort of positive ripple in the world. So I think one of the things that I will always say is like trauma therapy really restores your faith in just the decency and the loveliness of humanity. But it also there's something um really encouraging too, the ways that we trauma can be really isolating, but the ways that we heal and thrive when we have real community, right? Like as soon as you have a person that feels a sense of togetherness with other people, that knows that they are safe and held, it's amazing just how much we thrive. And so I think I've also just learned to really appreciate in my own journey and as a therapist how important that real connection with other folks is. Whenever I'm feeling stressed, I do the same things I would encourage my clients to do. I do the same techniques and all those things. But the most important is I check in with the people that I feel safe and loved
hmm
around.
My next question is really important because it talks because oftentimes people, that are going through complex trauma and stuff, they oftentimes they might not be as open or as forthcoming because the trauma that they've had in the past, it was really hard for them to overcome. So my question is, what do you do as a therapist to sort of, make sure that they feel seen and heard and that you're actively listening because actively listening is key.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. This is a huge part of trauma therapy is that earning and maintaining trust with folks. I think a lot of how I see that is there's a lot of messages people have gotten before they get to me. They get a lot of messages about how they should react to things, how they should be, how they should think, what their healing should look like. And I like to give them a very different experience in therapy where they're the ones that are centered, where when you're checking in with them, even little things like noticing what words do they use to describe things in their own story, right? Like using their own choice of words. I try to empower them in all these little ways where I'm very intentional that I don't try to put labels on them from my own things. I look for their wording. I ask and get a sense of their ways of thinking about things. I get a sense of their analogies. I get a sense of what if they were living wholly and feeling safe, and if they were getting to the point that they want to see in life, like what does that look like to get a sense of where we're going? And so I don't ever go in assuming I know what they want as their outcome, right? Because we can all have such different ideas of what the good life is or what safety looks like. And I think even that, where they're not feeling pushed and where everything is actually about them and not somebody else's opinion, like that can put people at ease a lot. They're not having to defend themselves or having to humor someone else. It's a space that's actually all about them. And I think that can build a lot of trust fast. I think folks will notice that, especially when you're really listening and really catching on to what they're saying and you're reflecting that back, it just demonstrates to them that somebody is taking the time to really try to see them. And that experience can feel so new and so encouraging to folks that it really sends signals to you on multiple levels that this is different, right? Like this type of experience we're having right now is different. It might be safer. Maybe I could trust this person. And then the key is just as we keep working together, really continuing to be mindful about that so that we can maintain and honor that trust. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a huge
Uh,
part of it.
yeah. I always ask a therapist this is who has been like your mentor when it comes to like going into trauma psychology? Is there like a professor, a certain colleague that you've looked up to that and said, "Hey, I want to be like this person."
Yeah, oh my goodness, so many. There have been so many lovely folks who I could say, but the person that comes up most for me is her name is Anne Wagner. She's a fellow psychologist. She actually uh, was my mentor and supervisor when I was working at the Minneapolis VA, and she's the one that actually taught me narrative therapy, time-limited dynamic therapy, and not only is she just a very lovely, warm human, somebody that's just so wonderful to connect with and has just such a loving approach to folks around her and lives her values in such ways that are just, yeah, I admire her so much in so many ways as a person. But I also just, I loved her approach to care and to supervision. Yeah, I definitely felt the type of safety that you and care that you feel in therapy with her, even just as her supervisee or as her colleague. And the ways that she does things are definitely my aspiration. I would love to be that sort of safe and encouraging and inspiring space for somebody else as well, the way she was for me and continues to be for me. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. My next question is, um, like what if sort of um what do you still hope to learn in terms of something new? I get that you're like a trauma psychologist, but is there anything new on the horizon that you want to tap into?
Yeah, I've been learning a lot about um so I am an ADHD, so autistic ADHD person, and the it's been really nice getting to understand myself and others in this really neuroaffirming and non-pathologizing way. And I like being able to explore too some of the things that I think there wasn't space or welcome for in so many past professional settings. Talking too much or being too wordy. As you can see, I'm a pretty wordy person. They're being kind of wordy, saying things that to some folks might seem just a little bit odd, but or having like really intense interests. People and trauma are my special interest, and I love to talk about how like amazing and inspiring people are. And not everybody wants to hear that, all the time when they run into me. And so there are all these little quirks that I always had in childhood and adulthood that I've recently started to understand as just part of my neurodiversity. And I think it was folks like Anne and folks like some of my lovely mentors at the Fargo VA, where they were so affirming and welcoming that it helped me realize like I get to be my authentic self and still be considered professional. If anything, I think I'm much more effective in supporting others when I myself am feeling really grounded and authentic. Um, yeah, being really grounded and authentic is really opening up a lot of just more sustainable ways of approaching our field because it's trauma work is heavy work. And I think I had some
Mm-hmm.
of my own patterns coming in early on. I've always been part of my trauma response was that I've always been a caretaker and somebody who put other people's needs over my own. And this process for me of really understanding myself better and noticing those things has helped me with transitioning into creating a private practice where I'm giving the kind of care I wanted to give all along to folks, but I'm also maintaining a sort of sustainable work life for myself that is so much healthier and is what I've always wanted for myself, but didn't really know until more recently. So it's been kind of nice. I feel like a lot of the things I'm doing for me mirror some of the healing processes my clients and I go through for them. And
Mm-hmm.
that's been a very new and very, yeah, very meaningful learning area that I'm in.
Mm-hmm. And like to wrap this conversation up, what can other folks, who are wanting to go into trauma therapy, what can they sort of learn from your experience and how you've had to really like learn the ins and outs of it to sort of better prepare to really work with folks who with complex trauma.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, there's part of it, of course, is the thing we all think of, which is, doing the schooling, doing the supervised learning and intentional learning of different ways of thinking about healing. But I think there's a more important part that comes along with that, and that is self-learning. I think so much of our ability to truly show up for people and help them heal from trauma is that we ourselves are looking at what wounds we are carrying. I still think that some of the best uh, growth I've had in my process of becoming a trauma psychologist has been going to trauma therapy and doing my own work, doing my own healing. um, yeah, I definitely think that giving yourself loving kindness, treating yourself as also a person who goes through pain and deserves unconditional support and care and community, treating yourself in all of those lovely ways, and especially the earlier on, the better, because it's a very exploitative environment, unfortunately, especially for women of color. It is a very challenging environment to go through higher education and to go through these different settings. So you really want to be practicing that love for yourself as a way to learn how to not just heal others, but do so in a way where you're not sacrificing your own well-being to do so. Because I think we very much need more heart-led trauma therapists, but we absolutely don't need more people taking on the hurts and trauma of the world and not feeling supported themselves.
Mm-hmm. All righty.